The entire town swore that old library annex was cursed, and no one decent should ever step foot inside. But a broke single mom named Emily ignored every warning. On a freezing winter night in Duluth, Minnesota, she and her 6-year-old daughter unlocked a forgotten door beneath the snow-covered library and stumbled into a secret that had been hidden for half a century. What they uncovered wouldn't just rewrite the town's history. It would give desperate families a second chance and change their own lives forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. It's always powerful to see how far these stories travel. Winter rides Lake Superior sideways, carving white knives through Duluth streets. Emily Carter stepped off the Greyhound with her daughter's mittened hand folded inside her palm, the way a shoreline holds a small wave and refuses to let it be lost. 28 narrow-shouldered 5'4" Emily wore a thrift store parka 2 sizes too big that made her look like a sparrow in borrowed feathers. Dark brown hair, once glossy, now dulled by cheap shampoo, was tied back with an elastic that had snapped and been knotted again. Her skin was pale in the northern light, the kind of pallor that comes from vending machine dinners and too many hours of worry. But her hazel eyes stayed alert, the eyes of a person who has learned to count exits before counting blessings. Gentle by nature, yet stubborn when cornered, she moved carefully, a quiet survivor whose soft voice concealed a spine that had been soldered together by necessity. Mia was 6 small for her age, with wisps of blonde hair that refused to obey combs and a pink jacket meant for a milder state. She had a constellation of faint freckles across her nose and the gift dangerous in winter of finding comedy in the cold. Each time her breath turned to a puff of white, she giggled as if she'd invented magic. Her blue eyes carried a child's native trust, bruised but unbroken. She swung her legs as they sat on a plastic bench, humming a tune she half remembered from a TV in a shelter lobby. For Mia, life was still a game of pretend we're explorers, and Emily, a woman who could no longer afford luxuries like hope, played along because belief was the one blanket she could always tuck around her child. From the envelope, forwarded through 2 old addresses, Oklahoma then Kansas, Emily slid out the object that had pulled them north, a small copper-colored key, tarnished green around the teeth, stamped with 3 letters she'd traced so many times. The grooves felt familiar to her fingertips. NPA. A brittle slip of paper yellowed as if it had waited decades in a drawer carried 5 words: North Pier Annex, ask librarian. No signature, no explanation. Just a suggestion, dressed like an instruction, and a direction that felt less like a plan than a dare. The depot doors breathed warm air flavored with coffee and diesel. Emily's phone cracked like a spider's web. Daisies, on the case rubbed to ghosts, managed one more act of faith and loaded a map. North Pier Annex, she found, was real an auxiliary building once used by the public library near the harbor where iron ore ships wintered like sleeping giants. The listing said, closed maintenance hold, which often means forgotten until someone decides to sell the land. She could feel that old ache rise, false hope, the most expensive currency she'd ever learned to spend. But the key's weight in her pocket argued back, small and unreasonable as a child insisting on joy. "Are we moving in there, Mommy?" Mia asked, eyes huge, voice muffled under her scarf. "We're going to see what the key opens," Emily said, and she let herself put one gentle finger on the word future. "And we'll be smart about it." The taxi line outside was a row of snow-dusted sedans idling like patient horses. Their driver came with a face carved by winters and shift work, owing about 50 heavy-set layers of flannel under a navy jacket. Dark beard, salted with white, and trimmed just enough to suggest he owned better clippers, but chose blunt efficiency. His eyes set deep under practical brows carried the wary kindness of a man who'd watched too many bad things happen slowly. A faded wedding band sat on his finger, the kind men keep even when they no longer wear the story that came with it. He didn't waste words, economy born from long roads and passengers who wanted silence more than conversation. "North Pier Annex," he said, voice gravel rubbed smooth by coffee. In the rear view, his gaze flicked to Mia, then to Emily taking quick, stock-worn, parka-frayed gloves, a mother doing arithmetic with time and money. That place hasn't been open since, hell, I don't know, before the Harborview remodel. "Can you take us?" Emily asked. She kept her tone polite, neutral, years of practice at making herself an easy passenger, a frictionless customer, a woman who would not be remembered by anyone with a clipboard. Owen shrugged. "Meter runs the same either way. Hop in." He pulled into the glittering gray that was Duluth in January snow sideways lake, like hammered steel sky a lid. On a good day, the city looked like a hymn. Today it was a bunker with steeples. They passed the lift bridge, the dark backs of sleeping freighters, and a line of brick buildings frost-tattooed under eaves. Owen drove with two hands and drove like a man whose hands had saved him from worse than ice. After a minute, he said, not looking back, "You got people here." "Just an address," Emily said. He grunted, half concern, half respect for the courage it takes to admit you have no net. North Pier Annex, crouched by the harbor like an old tugboat stranded on land, squat brick-boarded windows, ironwork choked with ice. Snow mounded against the threshold. The sign's paint had scabbed away, so Annex read Anne like a name remembered but not spoken. It did not look like a miracle. It looked like what the world had taught Emily to expect of it: locked doors, cold rooms, a complicated invoice later. Something in her chest started to fold the defensive crease she made when hope tried to lift its head. But Mia squeezed her hand twice, their private code for "we're still together." Invented in a shelter corridor when lights went out and a stranger slurred a prayer 3 doors down. "Stay with me," Emily said. "No running." Owen didn't drive off. He idled by the curb, pretending to adjust his radio. People who live by lakes learn to hang around for endings. Storms turn quick. The key was cold as she fit it to the old brass lock. She expected resistance, a stubborn turn that would snap the shaft and leave her eating apologies she couldn't afford to cook. Instead, the mechanism, oiled once long ago by careful hands, accepted the teeth with a tender click. A modest sound, but to Emily it felt like a hinge swinging inside her chest, something that had rusted shut, finally remembering how to move. The door groaned open about 6 inches, the width of a question, then stuck until she put her shoulder to it and pushed with the strength of a mother who has carried a sleeping child up 7 flights when the elevator died. Dust breathed out, tasting like old paper, old glue, old winter. The corridor beyond was narrow and book-lined on one side. The other side held a row of coat hooks and a long bench whose varnish had bubbled into blisters. Light came meanly through high painted-over panes. The kind of place where stories once waited for hands to choose them. "Smells like school," Mia whispered, delighted. She had never known a school that didn't come with scrambling and roll calls, but to her books in any quantity meant safety. She stood on tiptoe and peered at the spines. "Why's it all sleeping?" "Because nobody's woken it up yet," Emily said, surprised at herself for offering the metaphor. She stepped inside. Her boots creaked on wood that had stiffened in the cold. She felt the now familiar flip of anxiety, the checklist mind that measured threats, exposed nails, black mold, hidden person camera. Another set of instincts moved alongside the fear, a catalog of potential heat registers, a water line, a breaker box under a faded panel. She had learned to see both risk and resource because survival demanded both eyes. "Hello," she called automatic politeness to the dust. Her voice sounded smaller than she liked. From the far end, a soft metallic rattle answered, just the wind, worrying a chain, she told herself. She listened anyway. Owen had gotten out of the cab and stood in the doorway, now broad as a winter doorframe hat, low hands in jacket pockets. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, not in challenge, but as if offering her one last off-ramp from whatever this road was. "If the key fits." Emily said the door's already decided. He gave that a sideways nod a Duluth man gives when a stranger says something that's almost poetry. Then he stayed where he was, a quiet witness. They moved slowly past a bulletin board still pinned with curling flyers, story time, 10 a.m. Saturdays. Knitting circle. We remember Grace, the last one written in thick black marker letters like a child's date from years ago. Emily tucked the name away. Grace, a small word with a long history. Somewhere under the wainscoting, a radiator ticked in a tired rhythm as if it had tried and failed to keep winter out and now kept time for the dust instead. Her thoughts threaded backwards the way minds do in empty rooms. To the landlord who sold the house and left her 6 days to find somewhere else. To the manager who slashed her hours and apologized with an email. To Mia's father, clever at first sweet when there were witnesses who vanished the week rent was due, leaving behind a frozen account and the kind of silence that trains you not to ask questions in offices. The copper key was absurd against the weight of those facts. So was she standing here in a stranger's ruin pretending a door could be a plan? But absurdity sometimes saves people logic would let sink. Mom Mia said, pointing with mittened certainty that says, "Ask librarian." A taped paper strip yellowed like the note in the envelope had indeed been fixed to an interior office door. Librarian inquiries in faded type. Someone long ago had typed that word with purpose. Emily turned the knob. It opened to a narrow office with a desk and a metal filing cabinet, the kind that dominates a room by being square. A wool cardigan hung on a coat hook, ghost of a person who folded things neatly. The desk drawers were locked. Another lock for another day. Against the window a plant had long ago surrendered and become a sculpture of itself. On the desk, though, lay a business card under a paperweight shaped like an oar boat. Margaret Porter. Reference Services, Duluth Public Library. The card edges were clean, the phone number local. Emily picked it up and felt a tremor of something almost like relief. The note hadn't lied. Ask librarian. Perhaps the conversation she needed still existed in the city where questions learned to hibernate. She looked to the doorway. Owen was still there, a square of dark against the glittering white outside. He raised his chin toward the card as if to say, "You got a line to the world." He had the look of a man who'd been helped once and kept the receipt folded in his wallet, not sentimental but unwilling to let someone else freeze if it cost him nothing to hold the door. "We'll call from the depot," Emily said to Mia. "Warmer there." She took one last look at the corridor, the shelves, the sleeping air, the way dust dances when a room remembers it has light, and then pulled the door to careful, to keep the key in her pocket like a promise that would not survive another mailing. Back in the taxi, the heater thumped a tired lullaby. Emily pressed the business card between her palms like a laminate prayer. She wasn't a believer in miracles anymore. She believed in hours worked and receipts kept and the math of groceries. But she knew how to follow the next right clue. Her mind, which had been a room of flapping curtains, settled. Call Margaret. Ask about the Annex. Learn the rules. She could do rules. Rules were a kind of shelter. Owen pulled away from the curb with the light touch of a man who knows ice owns the road, and humans are temporary. "You find what you needed?" he asked. "Not yet," Emily said, feeling the shape of possibility like warmth she could almost cup, "but I found where to ask." Mia leaned her head against Emily's arm and drew a heart in the fog on the window, then another inside it, smaller, as if practice made safety. Outside, Duluth kept snowing. Inside, Emily held a key that had chosen to work and a name that might open the next door. Between those two metal and ink, she felt a path thin as thread and strong as wire, the beginning of a line she could walk all the way to spring. The next morning, the cold was a dull knife. Emily sat in the far corner table of the public library main branch, the one with a view of Lake Avenue, her coat still zipped because heat in this building was a suggestion, not a promise. Mia sat across from her, coloring an outline of a cat she had drawn from memory tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in a look of fierce concentration only children achieve when they do not know the world is watching. Emily dialed the number from the card. Her thumb hesitated once-twice as if reason begged her not to blow whatever magic this was by clarifying it. But she pressed. The line rang. A female voice answered, not cold, not tired, not formal. A voice that sounded like someone sharpening her sentences before offering them, as if words to her were tools, not decoration. Margaret speaking. Emily introduced herself, voice steady on surface, trembling underneath like thin ice. There was a small pause. Curiosity, not suspicion, and Margaret invited her to come upstairs. 3rd floor. Special holdings room. I have the annex paperwork here. I'll unlock storage. Margaret Porter turned out to be in her mid-60s, tall, nearly 5'11", with a straight spine that gave the impression she'd once been an athlete or a dancer. Silver hair pulled in a low twist behind her head like a precise idea pinned in place. Her face was fine-boned, her nose elegant, her cheekbones high, and there were faint, thoughtful lines above her eyebrows, the kind writers have from decades of frowning at paragraphs before approving them. Her eyes were a soft, gray blue, like first ice on the harbor shallows. And yet there was warmth in her manner, controlled warmth, measured warmth, the warmth of a woman whose job was turning chaos into catalog. She wore a navy cardigan, pressed trousers, pearl earrings, dignity as uniform. She walked, not like an old woman, but like a woman who refused to be rushed or slowed by time. Her tone was professional, but there was something else there too, recognition like she had seen Emily's face in older photographs of other women who had come here in need decades ago. Margaret led Emily and Mia down a hallway that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old microfilm. Mia skipped half a step behind, happy to be where the walls had books and the adults were not panicking. At a locked door, Margaret retrieved a ring of keys, heavy labeled with laminated tags, and unlocked storage. They entered a long room of shelves and archival boxes. Air was cool, the light dim enough to protect paper. Margaret walked to the back wall and gestured toward a cedar chest that sat alone on a low table. This chest came from the annex, she said. Transferred here when the building was mothballed. No one has opened it in 15 years. The chest had a lock, small copper, the same shade as the key Emily carried. Her breath stuttered. She slid the key in, turned. The lock opened like a sigh released after decades under tension. Inside were leather-bound ledgers, brittle at the edges, tied with faded twine, envelopes, photographs, and on top an old hand-typed card, property of G. Whitman. Snow Harbor Circle Records. Grace Margaret said quietly. Grace Whitman. She was reference librarian during the plant layoffs in the 70s. She didn't follow rules the way the city expected librarians to. Margaret's mouth twitched at the corners, not disapproval, rather admiration. Grace believed shelter was an intellectual right as much as a physical one. She was radical kindness, almost too radical for the era. They opened the first ledger. The ink was fading, but legible. Entries dated 1968, 1969, 1971. Lists of names. Not authors, not books. People. Families. Provided bed for 3 nights, father looking for work, steel mill furlough. Mother and infant eviction returned to Tennessee by bus fare donation. Taught literacy class, adult women, improved reading levels. Each page was a soft explosion of evidence this building had once been a small ark for people drowning quietly in America's middle distance. Emily read a passage aloud. Snow Harbor Circle must not be discovered. The city would shut us down. This annex must remain modest, so it may remain alive. The words crawled into Emily's bloodstream. She thought of every motel room she'd been chased from at checkout time, every application that never led to a call back, every time she tried to stretch $119 into 3 days of groceries. She had not known Grace like this, not the woman, not the concept. But here it had been, a sanctuary disguised as a storage building. Margaret stepped back, giving Emily space to metabolize. Margaret looked at Mia, at the thin jacket, the coloring page, and something in the older woman's expression shifted. A memory, maybe, or recognition. This is how they come to us now. quiet, carrying children and desperation in equal measure. Margaret spoke gently. "Do you know why you got the keys?" Emily shook her head. Margaret exhaled softly the way someone does before delivering a sentence that reframes all previous sentences. Grace's estate included a legal trust. Very quiet, very private. Stated that if someone in need presented that key and unlocked either the annex or this chest, they would be evaluated as a potential successor. This building is not public property in the normal way. It is a living trust asset disguised as city infrastructure. Mia whispered, eyes wide, the key found Mommy. Emily swallowed, because it felt like that. Margaret continued, I cannot promise anything. I do not control the trust. But I can initiate the process. A representative, the attorney who administers it, would contact you. She handed Emily a form, short 2 pages, not the bureaucratic novel Emily expected. Name, contact number, current situation description, nothing else. No salary verification, no landlord references, just human truth. Emily felt ashamed for a moment. What was she supposed to write? Homeless. Discarded. But she wrote in plain ink, her handwriting small and neat because she wanted to present herself the way she once was, efficient, worth hiring, worth trusting. Margaret said Grace believed in mothers. Emily blinked tears she refused to let fall, because she had wanted so badly for someone to believe in her, not to rescue her, just to believe she was real. As they closed the chest, Mia tugged Emily's sleeve. Mommy, look. On the underside of the cedar lid, burned in careful script, 3 words, Leave no one. Grace Whitman had carved her mission into wood. Margaret locked storage again. They returned to the main hall. The snow outside had eased. The lake shimmered like it might return mercy to the world. Margaret shook Emily's hand. The older woman's grip was strong, intent. You will get a call, she said. Emily nodded. Mia slipped her mittened hand inside Emily's and squeezed twice their code, but this time Emily felt the squeeze returned from the world itself. They stepped into the street. For the first time in months, Emily didn't feel like the cold was winning. She didn't have certainty yet. But she had direction. And direction was oxygen. They headed back toward the bus depot, Mia hopping over patches of salt in the sidewalk. Emily held the key inside her pocket, the metal warmer now from her skin rather than frozen with mystery. She whispered in her chest quietly so no one could hear it and break it maybe. Snow thickened the windows of the library by afternoon, thick enough that the edges blurred and white swallowed shape, but Duluth residents moved through it anyway, heads tipped down like soldiers in slow retreat. Emily waited for the call from the trust attorney, but the call she got first was not the one she wanted. It was a voicemail left at the main branch front desk. Someone had overheard something. Someone had said something. Someone had spread something. The annex was on a list being pitched quietly to a developer. The name was Colin Drake. Colin walked into the picture 3 days later as if summoned by rumor. He had the body language of a man who expected rooms to tilt forward to shake his hand. 33, 6 feet tall hair, styled with precision jawline shaped by gym discipline and a beard that was trimmed weekly by some barber who understood the geometry of power. His skin was tanned, the deliberate tan of indoor men who purchased outdoor from a salon. His teeth too white. His confidence casual like a whip. His coat was black cashmere, perfectly tailored. He was money disguised as a person with the moral compass of a man who believed money was morality. Emily saw him for the first time as she was trying to clean a row of sagging shelves in the annex. She had the feeling the annex was waiting for her, even though she had no legal key to stay. Margaret had allowed her temporary supervised access. The attorney still hadn't called. Emily was not foolish enough to overstep. But she wanted to clean the dust as if cleaning meant preparation. Mia sat on the cold wood floor with markers drawing a picture of a big house with yellow windows and stick figures inside. Emily recognized herself and Mia in the drawing, but Mia added a giant heart around them both. Mia always added hearts as if drawing them could reinforce reality. Colin knocked once and then opened the annex door wide without waiting for permission. He scanned the interior like a wolf, calculating weakness. "Cute," he said. "Not at anyone in particular, just the building." Emily stood straighter instinct, bracing the edges of her spine. "Can I help you?" "I'm assessing potential," he said, and extended a hand. "I'm Colin." He said his name with the confidence of someone who believed reputation walked into every conversation before he did. Emily hesitated before shaking his hand. His palm was warm and very dry. Colin scanned her face with the subtle cruelty of a man measuring whether a woman might be persuaded or bulldozed. He nodded toward Mia. "And who's this?" Emily stepped slightly in front of her daughter. "My daughter? We're only here with librarian permission." Something like mild amusement flickered. "Don't get comfortable. This whole structure is on a preliminary redevelopment review. We're thinking micro-lofts, lake proximity, trendy, efficient." He turned and squinted toward the back wall. "Anything historic gets cleared first, then I level the rest." Emily felt the color drain from her chest. The annex wasn't hers. She had no authority. She had no voice here. But grief has a way of unearthing courage. "You're talking as if demolition is already certain." "It always is," Colin said, smiling with his perfect white teeth. "The only question is how many meetings we waste on the way." Mia stood up and moved to stand beside her mother. Mia was small, but she had inherited Emily's quiet steel. She stared at Colin with the unwavering judgment only a child can manage because children never fear calling evil what it is. Colin left with a self-satisfied flourish of his black coat. Emily wanted to scream, but she couldn't. Screaming never solved anything. Screaming only made the world call you hysterical. She had one task: call Margaret. Margaret would know the correct next step. That night, Emily waited for a number from the trust attorney. Her phone finally rang at 7:13 p.m. She didn't recognize the number, but answered before the first ring finished. "Emily Carter. My office received your intake form." His voice was deep, steady, and had that straightforward timbre of someone who has been reading contracts for 3 decades. "My name is Daniel Brooks." Daniel arrived the next morning in a navy parka and a leather briefcase that had seen better years. 38 years old, short beard, dark brown, square jaw beneath the bristle eyes with that wary sharpness common to former public defenders who have spent years in courtrooms losing sleep trying to save people from systems designed to consume the poor. Daniel moved with controlled purpose and possessed a sarcasm that flickered in and out of his voice like static. He had lost his generosity with bureaucrats years ago, but he had not lost his instinct to fight the powerful. Daniel walked the perimeter of the annex with Emily and Mia at his side, recording tiny details, photographing wall joints, heating vents, signage layers, date stamps, evidence that the annex had been an active civic function long enough to qualify for certain historic protections. "We can stall demolition," he said. "At minimum. Drake can't do anything yet." But he's testing tone. He glanced sideways at Emily. "You're going to need a public presence, not a fight in the dark, a visible one. Community must see this building lit and alive. People defend what they believe they belong to." Emily exhaled shakily. She had believed belonging was a luxury. Maybe belonging was a weapon. That night, Daniel helped file an emergency injunction request. Emily didn't understand the dense Latin phrases, but she understood Daniel's eyes focused, alive, almost gleeful. Fighting this kind of enemy was his oxygen. Losing to men like Colin had wounded him years ago. This case, Emily suspected, was another chance for Daniel to fix a piece of his own past. By evening, Emily improvised a first gathering inside the annex, no announcement, no budget. She found an old kettle and boiled water over the annex rusty basement stove. She made hot cocoa by stirring cheap grocery store powder with milk donated from a neighbor who didn't ask questions. Mia taped a handwritten sign to the table, Cocoa for warm. Free. The sign was crooked and adorable and spelled Cocoa wrong in the second line, but nobody cared. The annex windows glowed for the first time in decades. People inside laughed softly like animals emerging from hibernation. Around 8 p.m., a big orange tomcat wandered through the door like a monarch returning to its throne. The cat was fat, maybe 10 years old, with fur the color of October pumpkins dusted with snow. He made a single uninterested meow, walked to the sofa, jumped up, curled into a doughy circle, and closed his eyes. Mia squealed in delight. Someone in the room joked, softly, "Annex has a new landlord." Another chimed in, "Better than the developer." Everyone laughed. Quiet, but laughter nonetheless. And sometimes laughter is the first brick of community. Emily watched the room and felt time shift. Wind shrieked outside, but here inside the annex was warm with bodies and stories and mugs held between hands that had not held anything this gentle in weeks. She whispered to Daniel quietly so Mia wouldn't hear, "This building is coming back to life." Daniel nodded. "Yes, and that's what we need. Life is legal evidence." Emily realized something tectonic underneath her fear. This was not magic. This was intention. This annex had been a refuge once under grace. It could become one again. She wasn't inheriting a ghost story. She was inheriting a blueprint. And when she looked toward the old cedar chest in the corner and imagined Grace Whitman opening secret doors in the 70s, illegally creating safety inside a world allergic to compassion, Emily felt like she could breathe. For the first time in forever, she could breathe. Snow hammered the harbor roof like 1,000 fists the night Emily and Mia returned to the annex alone. Daniel had emailed her 2 hours earlier he needed more evidence. Not sentiment, not poetry. Hard, physical evidence that this building had been used for community aid, not just storage. Judges did not approve injunctions based on nostalgia. They approved based on documents, dates, ledgers, signatures. Emily, still new to the strange language of power, understood one thing sharply. If she didn't find more proof, one man with clean teeth and a demolition contract could erase an entire 70-year-old legacy with one signature. She and Mia began sorting through the supply closets in the west wing of the annex. Dust felt thick as velvet. They pulled down boxes labeled in fading pencil linen stationery crafts, but inside was mostly shredded paper and dead spiders. Mia tried to keep her spirits up by humming the same little tune she had been humming since they arrived in Duluth. A tune she invented herself that somehow sounded like a lullaby for a future that did not yet exist. Emily, exhausted, kept moving because fatigue was a luxury she could not afford. Behind a stack of old chairs, Emily noticed a square of wall paneling that looked slightly different. Something was off in the symmetry of the boards, just a fraction smaller than the others. She pressed her fingers to the edge. The panel shifted inward from the pressure. A small latch, not visible until the panel tilted, revealed itself. Her pulse stuttered. She pushed. The panel opened into a small hatch. Beyond it, darkness. Mia's eyes widened. "Mommy, a secret." Emily found a rusty pull-chain light. She tugged. The bulb flickered to life weakly, just enough to illuminate a narrow staircase going down about 12 steps steep, utilitarian built of rough timber. The air drifting up from below was warmer than the annex above. Emily realized this must be the old boiler corridor. She lifted Mia into her arms and descended slowly, boots careful on each step, because the last thing she needed was a broken ankle in a forgotten subfloor. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a small chamber. No windows, poured concrete walls, a single enormous old furnace in the corner, the kind that looked like a steel dinosaur heart that once pumped heat through the bones of the building. But that wasn't what made her exhale sharply. Near the far wall was a row of wooden crates stacked waist-high. Each was labeled in neat typewriter font coats, kids size 4 to 6, another boots, kids 6 to 8, another mittens, various, and then 4 metal milk crates full of thick envelopes bound in rubber bands, and on the table beside them a ledger bound in faded blue cloth with a label glued crooked on the spine. Trust accounts, Snow Harbor Circle, Harbor. Emily swallowed. The trust wasn't just a romantic idea Grace wrote about in her diaries. Grace had handled money, dispersed it, tracked it. It wasn't metaphor, it was infrastructure. She opened the ledger. Inside were bank account numbers, deposit logs from 1973, 1976, 1981, and near the back a sheet of yellow legal paper in Grace Whitman's slanted handwriting. Remaining balance unspent. Should funds continue to earn interest, this can restart the circle. December 1982. Colder air did not come from this room. This room breathed purpose. This was the engine of a hidden economy of compassion. Mia gently picked up a pair of tiny mittens, red wool hand-knitted, and held them to her cheek. "These are for kids," she whispered. Emily nodded, her throat tight. Yes, they were meant for kids like you. And as she said that, she knew she wasn't just the next in a line of desperate mothers. She was the next link in an inheritance of caretakers. The next morning, Emily walked into Daniel's office, not a sleek downtown tower, but a converted brick studio above a coffee shop. Daniel Brooks sat behind a battered wooden desk, with his sleeves rolled up to the elbow, pale forearms dusted with hair, short beard, framing a jaw that looked chiseled and determined. He looked tired, but alert, his brown eyes alive in the way people's eyes get when work makes them a better version of themselves. Emily placed the blue ledger on his desk. Daniel flipped it open. His expression shifted, first curiosity, then recognition, then a small private smile that looked like victory warming his bones. "Oh," he said softly, "he won't be able to bulldoze this." He photographed each page carefully, with his phone cataloging every date in chronological order. He recorded cross-references to the archive number Margaret had given him for Grace's diaries. He tapped his screen rapidly, thumb flying like a pianist's. "This isn't just evidence," he said. "This is direct proof of original charitable purpose." Emily's heart beat faster. "So..." Daniel looked up at her. "This isn't just a building. Legally, it's an instrument, a vehicle for a mission. Courts hate destroying mission property, especially when founded on charitable trust. We can argue continuity, intent. We have receipts, we have inventory, we have funds, we have storage of child-specific goods. The judge will not dismiss that lightly." Emily felt something uncoil inside her, a tight inner rope she had been clenching since she first slept in her car with Mia. She almost cried, but she steadied herself. There was too much work to do. Daniel leaned forward. "Emily, if you want, if you are willing, this could be more than an injunction. This could be the moment the circle returns." Emily blinked. "I don't know if I have the right." "You're the one who came here," Daniel said, "not by birth, by fidelity. You showed up. That counts." Later that afternoon, word had spread. Duluth is small. People talk. And now people talked about the Annex not as an abandoned building, but as something waking. A retired nurse named Norma, early 70s, white hair and a frizzy bun. Kind eyes but stern mouth that spoke as if she raised 4 sons, and would raise 4 more if needed, arrived carrying 3 dozen pairs of knitted gloves. She said she'd been knitting all winter to keep her hands from stiffening. A hardware store owner named Pete, late 50s, broad-shouldered, bald on top, but with thick gray beard trimmed neatly, a man who smelled like sawdust and WD-40, came by with a sack of rubber snow boots from last year's unsold inventory, muttering that they're just sitting in the back anyway. A baker named Anna, 40, round face, Dominican roots, warm voice that made everything sound like comfort-delivered bread, 8 loaves still warm. Emily's hands shook as she arranged the items. She wasn't just fighting a developer anymore. She was reactivating memory. Memory of kindness. Kindness that once saved families like hers. Mia set up her cocoa table again. This time she spelled cocoa right. The fat orange cat returned, climbed onto the same sofa cushion as if the building was his kingdom, and Emily was merely his housekeeper. Norma laughed. Pete snorted. Anna clapped. Daniel took pictures for the injunction file to show community activation. Emily didn't tell Mia that this was legal evidence. She simply let her daughter believe this was home forming itself from good work. Around 8 p.m., as people filtered out into the snow, Emily closed the annex door slowly, her hand lingering on the old brass handle. The building felt warmer now. Not from the furnace, from presence, from people returning to their own capacity to care. Emily whispered into the quiet, "Grace, we found it." And she meant not the ledger, but the use. The lake effect blizzard was the kind that made Duluth feel like a snow globe being shaken by an angry god. By the time Emily, Mia, Daniel, and the others reached City Hall, the marble steps outside were buried, the brass railings nearly swallowed, and wind was a beast with 10 claws. Inside, the Grand Rotunda glowed yellow under municipal lights, and salt melted into muddy tracks from boots. The chamber smelled like wet wool coats and fear and coffee. Emily stood near the corner of the chamber holding Mia's hand. She had slept only 2 hours last night, not because she was anxious, but because she had been folding donated blankets and labeling each with a size tag. Something about order made her calmer. Something about preparing made her feel less like someone waiting to be judged, more like someone acting with agency. Daniel Brooks stood near her straightening his navy tie. 38 years old, short beard, broad shoulders, eyes sharp behind rectangular glasses he wore today instead of contacts, the formal version of him. He looked like a man who had spent half his career losing to systems designed for the rich, and today he wanted blood. His jaw was tight, but his voice was calm. "Remember, you are not begging for mercy. You are defending a legacy." Mia clutched the orange cat in her arms. The cat tolerated it like a king tolerates a child long suffering but unbothered. The cat had become Annex mascot by accident, but today the cat was symbol. Colin Drake entered the chamber wearing a charcoal suit and a coat with a fur collar. 33 tanned skin beard, trimmed like a geometric equation, smile polished like a politician who practiced in the mirror. His shoes were so clean they looked like they had never known sidewalk salt. Colin strutted in with the confidence of a man expecting everyone here to be merely a procedural delay. He sat with his development consultant, who looked like he ironed his spine every morning. The council chairperson called the hearing to order. Council members read names, docket items, legal phrases. Snow thudded against the windows, a percussive reminder that the outside world was uninhabitable, without heat, without shelter, without infrastructure. Emily realized with slow horror Annex wasn't theoretical. It was survival. Daniel presented first. His voice was steady, not dramatic. He laid out the original trust intent. He presented the ledger those pages Grace had written by hand. He showed photographs of the coat crates, the mitten boxes, the sub-basement furnace corridor. He connected legal lines between precedent law and the Annex's probable classification as mission property. He moved like a surgeon, making precise incisions. When he finished, even the council chair, an old man with white mustache and the face of someone who'd lived through Duluth's plant collapse in the 1980s, nodded. Then public comment opened. A man stood up. A mechanic. His name was Robert "Rob" Hansen. 59 years old, big belly under flannel-thick gray beard covering half his throat, hands scarred from 40 years turning bolts. He spoke like a steelworker, slow plain truth, no rhetoric. "I slept there last night," he said. "That kid," he pointed at Mia, "gave me a hot drink and didn't look at me like trash." His voice cracked just once. "I've worked since I was 16 years old. I never thought at 59 I'd be choosing between rent and insulin." Then he sat down. Emily felt something break in the room. People shifted. People saw him now as a human, not a statistic. Then a young woman stood. A nurse. Her badge said St. Luke's Hospital. Her name was Thu Nguyen, 27. Asian American with Vietnamese roots, medium height. Soft brown eyes behind clear frame glasses, black hair tied back in a low bun. Her voice was gentle but firm, like someone who had to steady frightened patients daily. "I'm new here," she said. "Just moved from St. Paul. I've seen hypothermia cases triple in 2 weeks. We're losing elders in parking lots. One of them could have been saved if there was a warm place with someone awake." Annex was awake. She looked at the council, eyes wet but defiant. Human life is the highest morality. If we cannot agree on that, then what exactly are we doing here? The chamber went silent. Even Colin did not smirk. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she nearly collapsed under the weight of what she wanted to say. But when she looked down at Mia, the 6-year-old, holding the fat orange cat like he might save the world, Emily realized she didn't need to speak like a lawyer. She only needed to speak like a mother. She stepped to the microphone. "We are not asking for charity. We are asking to continue something that already existed. This building isn't a ruin. It is a record. It was built to keep people alive when Duluth had forgotten them." She paused. She felt every failure of her life rising up her spine, not to crush her, but to support her. "When I first came here, I was ashamed of being homeless. Now I see grace is not something you receive. It's something you pass forward. If you help us protect this building, you are not saving me. You are saving the future." Outside, a huge gust of wind slammed against the windows. People flinched. Then the vote. Council voted 5-2 in favor of preserving Annex as a live mission property. The vote legally renamed the Annex as Snow Harbor House. Emergency conditional use, daytime reading and skill-building rooms, nighttime discipline shelter, maximum 6 months stay per guest. Colin, to save face, offered publicly to donate roof repair and upgraded boiler system, calling it compromise, though it was really surrender disguised as benevolence. After the vote, people clapped. Real clapping, not polite clapping. Mia hugged the orange cat, and the cat allowed it as if even the cat understood history had been made. Daniel touched Emily's elbow gently. "You're the caretaker now." Emily closed her eyes. She had a home, not a private home, not a home of ownership, a home of stewardship. But it was still home. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the storm had softened. Sometimes God's miracles are not thunderbolts from the sky. Sometimes his miracles are small keys in old envelopes, dusty ledgers under old floorboards, a cup of hot cocoa in a storm, a stranger who shows up at the exact moment when your faith is one breath away from breaking. Sometimes the miracle is simply God sending the right person at the right time in the right place. And in daily life, we often miss these tiny miracles because we are so focused on the pain, the bills, the fear, the next problem. But God moves through ordinary people, through ordinary rooms, through the smallest acts of warmth we offer each other. So if tonight you are tired, if tonight you feel invisible, remember this: God still sees you. God is still writing. God is still able to turn a ruined place into a refuge. And if this story touched something inside your heart, don't keep it silent. Share this video. Leave a comment. Tell someone else that kindness still exists. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now so more souls can find these messages of hope. May God bless every person watching this. May he protect your home, your family, and your faith in tomorrow.